Welcome at another session of the Delphi Economic Forum of this year, 2024. And let me introduce you our guest. Our guest is Mr. Assen Vassilev. Mr. Vassilev, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Vassilev is former Minister of Finance of Bulgaria and a member of the Parliament, and one of the founders of the political party called Change is Continuing. Is it right?
Yes.
Okay. There's a big question about your country and the political developments, stability. You're going to have a new election in June 9, an election which is going to be held at the same time with the European elections. And this is the 6th election in the last 3 years. What are the prospects? How can you imagine that you will have a political stability, and how can this affect, in a positive way, of course, the economy?
So if you allow me, I'll go a little bit to the economy and then I'll go to the political stability. The two, of course, are linked, but not necessarily so. Bulgaria used to have essentially a stable government of EPP member, the Bulgarian party called GERB, which is a member of the EPP, more or less for the larger part between 2009 and 2021. 2020, there were some big protests, and in 21, that reign ended. And during that period, if you look at the Bulgarian economy, it did pretty well. Beginning of that period, we were about 44% of the EU average GDP purchasing power parity, adjusted GDP per capita. At the end of that period, we had caught up 10%, we were about 54%. So our rate of convergence was about 1% a year. Since 2021 until literally yesterday, we've had 5 elections, 5 governments, and we're on our 6th in 3 years. The main thing that happened during that period economically, since I was finance minister back in 21, immediately after the end of the Borisov government, and we did a mid-year budget update. And then since then, all the budgets have been done by my team, regardless of all the change of governments. We moved from 54% of the EU average to 64% of the EU average. So our rate of convergence to European average is about 3 times as fast, despite the lack of political stability. And that's due to several things. One is we actually did a complete change in the economic philosophy that Bulgaria was following. Before that, economic philosophy was very much akin to a Latin American country, where you have low tax rates, 10% by the way, personal and corporate. So if you're thinking about moving to Bulgaria, that's a good reason to move. We have low tax rates, stable. And all the money that the government was getting through taxes was essentially put into several large businesses. Large concentration, large construction companies. In the agriculture, you have about 10 families that were taking 80% of the subsidies, that sort of development, which brings economic growth, but doesn't bring inclusive economic growth. Since then, and if you see what happened since we entered the EU, our Gini was already high. It was in the low 30s. It went to over 40, the coefficient inequality, in 2020 to 2021. In the last 3 years, despite the COVID crisis, the war in Ukraine, and the energy crisis, as I said, our convergence rate is 3 times as fast relative to the previous decade. But more importantly, our Gini went down 3%. And as you know, when you have high inflation, usually inequality increases. We managed to decrease it. And what that has shown is that, and that's not magic, it's done by putting money into healthcare, education, increasing pensions, especially the minimums dramatically, increasing minimum wage and wages in general. Bulgaria had the highest real wage growth in all of the EU in 22 and was the second highest in 23. We are now at 64. If we get to about 70, that's when we start seeing Bulgarians from abroad coming back to the country, just because it makes sense for Bulgarians to be there. Why am I saying all of this? In answer to answer your question about political stability. This was done despite the lack of political stability. And as you know, lack of political stability makes sure investments are not as high. We have all of the problems that come with because of lack of political stability. Yet we still had record investments because we had very good growth and because people had actually purchasing power. So if you look at our FDI in the last year, in 23, it's the highest on record in Bulgaria since 2004, 2005. But we've come to the point where usually, you know, the economic textbooks, and if you studied like what I've studied, economic growth and development, you come to the point where you can enter the middle income trap. And the middle income trap means you get to a point and you cannot move beyond that point. And the reason for that is your institutions are flawed. If you don't have the right institutional setup, if you don't have fair courts, if you don't have good property right protection, if you don't have fair appointment process for all the public offices, where it's not connections or political connections that appoint you, but your skills and your ability to perform. If you don't fix those underlying institutions, you cannot move forward. And Bulgaria is now at that point. And we have been at that point for the last 2 or 3 years, and that's what the big fight is about. Mm-hmm. And that's where the political instability comes from. There is a large group of Bulgarians who want to change the fundamentals of the judiciary, of the security apparatus, and of the law enforcement, and make sure we have proper institutions, proper property rights. And there is a large group of people who benefit from this system, as it is today, who are unwilling to essentially remove that undue political influence from the system. And
maybe to become, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I think it's critical, a more pro-European country than a country which shows atheist than in the past. Right?
Exactly. But this is not only Bulgaria. If you look at developments in Spain in the 80s, Spain went through that process. If you look at developments in Italy in the late 80s, early 90s, Italy went through that process. I'm not very familiar with the Greek history, but I'm pretty certain Greece at some point probably went through a similar process. And that's a process of big political instability because you need to have real power transfer from a system that's based on patronage and to a system that's based on fair public appointments and on normal institutions. We are now at the point where Bulgarians see that process. They want that to happen, but it's going to take a while for that to happen because you have a very entrenched system coupled with some malign Russian influence in some of those institutions, which makes it doubly as hard.
Are you afraid of this interference, of this intervention by Russia, especially if you see the big image, which is the ongoing war in Ukraine?
That's a very interesting question. I think the last 3 years, Bulgaria has made a remarkable move towards European thinking. I was in government when the war started. And at that point, we helped Ukraine a lot. During the first 3 months, we were the main supplier of ammunition. We're still more than 30–40% of the ammunition supplied to Ukraine today, which is crazy. Bulgaria is too small to be 30% of the ammunition supply, just that Europe and the US haven't invested in the production capacity to do it yet. But we had to do it quietly because people were not accepting of that stance. ever since Gazprom stopped the gas that it supplied to Bulgaria, so we moved from 95% Russian gas to zero in the span of 24 hours. We were prepared for such an act, so we did it without increasing the prices and without gas interruption. So people suddenly saw it's not scary. And then we are now off Russian oil, also not scary. It's now public record that we have helped Ukraine and that we are helping Ukraine. Not scary. And if you look at what's happened in public Bulgarian discourse, for the first time in Bulgarian history, NATO is polling over 50% in terms of approval. You have more than 70–75% of the country pro-EU. There is the pro-Russian parties have been kept to around 15%. In elections. So despite a very active Russian propaganda campaign and the predisposition and the infiltration of some of the key institutions, we've managed to actually change the thinking to a large extent of the Bulgarian population to a point where I think right now it's going to be very hard to do a policy shift towards Russia. Okay.
Talking about, oops,
sorry.
It's okay.
It's okay.
I don't think that this was a Russian interference.
Sabotage, no, it's okay.
That's the good news.
Yes.
Anyway, so talking about Europe, you're facing a challenge, which is entering the Eurozone. You just entered the Schengen zone, which can affect positively your tourism, the waves of tourists coming and visiting Bulgaria, but you will enter Eurozone in 2025.
Yes.
Are you afraid that joining the Eurozone can multiply the troubles for the people and their income, as well as to bring some obstacles for Bulgarian companies to be competitive to other European countries and European economies in general?
Not at all. It will actually help, and it will help quite a bit for two reasons. One is Bulgaria has essentially been in the Eurozone since before the Eurozone existed. We had a crisis similar to what Greece had in 08. For us it was 97 when we had 20 banks go under, complete collapse of public finance, absolutely everything. And that's when we did a currency board and we pegged the lev to the Deutschmark at the point. And then when the Deutschmark was converted into euro, we repegged to the euro at the same rate. So Bulgaria has essentially been pegged to the euro for the last 27 years. Which means that anything the European Central Bank does gets automatically transmitted into Bulgaria. Bulgarian business, real estate, wages, everything's been pegged to the euro. So for us, essentially getting into the Eurozone just means changing the picture on the money, but doesn't create an economic effect in terms of competitiveness. The only effect that we expect would come directly into Bulgaria is that right now we have a transaction cost of about 1% of GDP, and that's going to go away. So businesses and people are going to have about 1% more to spend on investment or income or whatever they want to spend the money on. And we are already in year end 2. So we have the supervision and oversight of the banking system and also of the insurance industry. So I would say in terms of changing to the euro, it's a benefit. And for the first time in a very long time, Bulgaria will actually participate in the management decisions about the currency it uses. Because in 97 we basically gave up the active management of the Bulgarian currency. And I don't know how interesting it is, it's an interesting tidbit, but if you look at Bulgarian monetary history, and I'm going to go all the way back to Byzantium since we're in Greece. So for the first time, Bulgaria during Thracian times minted local gold coins. But then, for the first time since the foundation of the first Bulgarian state, 681, we managed to start minting coins in the Thessaloniki mint, and because we received a decree from Pope Innocent III. But we were linked to Byzantium, so we were minting Byzantium coins, gold coins. They had the face of the Bulgarian king at the time, but it was the Byzantium standard coins. And we participated essentially in the management of the worldwide currency at the time. Then, of course, the Turks came, so we used Turkish coins. And then after 1878, in 1880, we started printing Bulgarian lev, the current currency. It was pegged 1-to-1 to the French franc. And then during the Balkan Wars and World War I, we unpegged because the government needed money, so they started printing. Hyperinflation, everything for 7 years. And then in the interwar period, in the 20s, we pegged to the US dollar. And Bulgaria had the most stable currency in all of Europe. And in 47, after the Red Army came to Bulgaria, we repegged to the ruble. And then 1990, for the first time, we unpegged. And we had, for 7 years, management of our own currency, and then we had a hyperinflation again, so we pegged again. So essentially, Bulgaria has always been pegged to currencies in its history. And for the second time in history, we'll participate in making the decisions for a worldwide currency.
Okay, I have to confess that this is a very interesting point of view. I've never thought about it.
But if you think a lot of currencies...
It's a kind of independence.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, my last question in the remaining 2-3 minutes is about the bilateral relations with Greece. We know that the two countries, our countries, are closer than ever, but I wanted from you to describe in which sectors of the economy is this relationship established, and how can this relationship become better and better in the following years?
So I think a little known fact is that I think we're the third largest group of tourists into Greece. More than German tourists, I think, coming to Greece. You have Bulgarian tourists. We also have a lot of cooperation in the energy sector. We managed to build the interconnectivity in gas. We are expanding that, and we also doubled the interconnectivity in electricity, and that has helped both systems because they're very complementary. We are working on an intergovernmental agreement with Greece to put up a highway and fast rail connecting Alexandroupolis through Bulgaria, Romania, into Moldova, Ukraine, and also into Europe. And that is, along with land Schengen, which we still don't have, those two things together would open up the northern Greek ports to become real gateway for a lot of the cargo traffic that goes into Eastern Europe. And I think that's win-win for Bulgaria and for Greece. I think literally right now we're at the 1950s, putting the physical connectivity in place. I think once we do that, we need to move to simple things like soccer and English summer programs for the kids from both countries to go to each other and know each other, because that's what fosters cultural ties, cooperation, business ties later in life. I think that there are a lot of businesses that do business in both countries and benefit from that, and I think that can be extremely, extremely helpful. And just to kind of give you an idea of what happens when you have the connectivity in place, I'm going to use Turkey as an example, and I know that's very bad form, but it's important to know. So the Bulgarian-Turkish border, that's the old Istanbul to Vienna route, is the second busiest land border in the world today, after US-Mexico. The value of trade that goes through that border, and that's one highway, one railway, is 300 billion euros per year. 4,000 trucks are processed every single day at that border. And that's all the traffic that comes there. Now with the war, we know the Black Sea is basically shot as an economic zone. Insurance cost is high, shipping is dangerous, so we need everything that was coming through the Black Sea to start coming through the Mediterranean, and that's where building that corridor from Alexandroupolis is really key, I think, both for Greece and for Bulgaria.
Mr. Vassilev, thank you very much for joining us for this discussion, and thank you all for watching us or here live or via the internet.